for me to sometimes do videos without brushing the mic? Would you like it half the time? Would you like it once in a while? Would you like only brushing? No brushing? Just let me know what you think, okay? And I'll try to get like a generalized opinion out of that. Okay. Today's true crime case has been the inspiration for not only two horror movies, but an urban legend as well. So, have you ever seen or heard of When a Stranger Calls? It was made in 1979, and in 2006. Now, I'm not sure if these two movies are really exactly the same as each other, or if they just have a similar, theme. But I can tell you that basically those movies are about a babysitter who keeps receiving a phone call from someone who says, "Have you checked the children?" Okay, now I haven't seen the movie, so I don't even really know how they end, but these movies are based on the crime that I'm going to talk about tonight. And there is an urban legend known as the Babysitter and the Man Upstairs, also about a creepy babysitting scenario. Okay, so having said that, let's move ahead into this tragic crime, because it is tragic, of course. So she had plans to go to a school dance on Saturday, March 18th, 1950. Now, mind you, that's only about 3 days before her 14th birthday. But anyway, she was going to that dance, but shortly before, she got a phone call from one of her two babysitting families. These were the Romacks, Ed and Anne, and they had a 3-year-old son. They asked if she could babysit for him that night because they had plans to go out with some other friends and play cards and, eat, drink, be merry, whatever it is, Now, Janett thought to herself, I would rather go babysit and make some money than go to this dance because Easter is coming and there is a certain burgundy suit that I want to buy and I need to save up some money for it, so let me do this. And she enjoyed babysitting and she liked children, so it wasn't a big deal. And a little bit after that, she got another phone call from her second babysitting family, the Muellers. They were going to hang out at the same place as the Romack family. They were also invited to the same get-together. And they asked her to babysit. But of course it was too late. She told them, sorry, I am already babysitting for the Romacks tonight. Okay. 7:30 that night, Janett headed over to the Romacks' house. They lived in a rural area, very isolated and dark and, creepy when you think about being a babysitter, a young babysitter. But nonetheless, when she got there, the parents told her how to get their child to sleep, and then they told her, don't answer the door unless you know the person, and only turn on the porch light if someone comes to the door. I guess to save electric. And in case there's any trouble, here is our shotgun. Let me give you a quick lesson on how to use it. So they quickly showed her how to load and unload the gun and how to shoot it. Maybe that's kind of a normal thing over there back then. But I babysat when I was a kid and nobody ever showed me a shotgun. If they did it, then I'd really be afraid. I'd be like, I'm gonna need a shotgun. I think I'll go to the school dance, you know what I'm saying? But I guess that was normal. So, they left. Now, at about 10:30 that night, the local police station got a phone call from a frantic female, just saying something like, please come now, something of that nature, and then that was it. That's all they got. The line went dead. And even though they were, the police were really shook up by this, oh my gosh, this is legit, somebody is really in trouble. But they couldn't do anything about it. where they left it. But to their horror, poor little Janett was laying dead on the living room carpet in a pool of her own blood. She had been strangled with the electric cord from their iron. The cord had been cut off with a scissor and used to strangle her. And in addition to that, she had been raped, beaten, and she had multiple punctures from a mechanical pencil, which was odd. And the phone was laying not far from her, off the hook. Yes, she was the one who made that call. We don't really know where that call fit in, but, into the scenario, but she made the call. Of course, the mother ran upstairs to check on her little son, and he was fine. He was asleep. So, they called the police, of course. And it was noticed that in addition to everything else, the living room window had been broken. But there weren't any footprints on, the piano bench below the window. So that was weird. If you had broke in the window, wouldn't you leave some footprints or handprints or something on the bench? Outside the window, in the outside of the house by the window, there was a garden hoe that was used to break the window, but they didn't keep that hoe outside. They kept it inside. So none of it is making very much a sense here, but when the police came, oddly enough, there were two sets of police. There was the city police and the local police. They both seemed to have jurisdiction over this particular location for some reason. And the two could not really decide on a common explanation. One group said this is somebody that she knew. That's why she turned on the light on the porch. She let them in. She didn't pick up the shotgun. And, the broken window was like a decoy, that after the fact, they found the garden hoe. They broke the window to make it look like something that it wasn't. But the other police force insisted that the person had broken in through the window. So that became some kind of a big issue, but in the meanwhile they started interviewing, trying to find a suspect. Now, one thing to note is that about 4 years before this, a very similar crime had happened in the same town. was a 35-year-old trash collector. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. And ultimately he had admitted that he did murder his wife. But they decided, given like the timeline there, that he also had murdered Mary Lou. So they questioned him relentlessly for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, until they finally got something that they felt was like a confession or admission of guilt, something of that nature, and they put him down for that crime, in addition to murdering his wife. You know, at least it gave them a way to close that case. And he was given the death penalty for murdering his wife. And in 1947, which was like, so the Mary Lou Jenkins murder was in 1946. And he must have been out, you know, not arrested yet at the time of her murder, right? But now already in 1947, he's going for his death penalty. He's going to the chair at that moment, you know, so they did things pretty quick back then, I guess. Anyway, so when he was just a couple hours away from his execution, he told them, "I didn't kill Mary Lou Jenkins, I'm just letting you know." He didn't say that he didn't kill his wife, that he was, you know, he had admitted, but he said, "I did not kill Mary Lou." So, that person was still out, and sounds like not only did he kill Mary Lou, but he killed Janett as well, and he's still out there. So it's important to find him before someone else gets hurt. So, they did find a prime suspect for the Janett Christman murder. And let me tell you how that came around. The morning after her murder, Ed Romack, you know, he was the father at the house where Janett was murdered. He got a phone call from his friend Robert Mueller. Now, the Muellers were the other babysitting family, and Robert Mueller had called Janett the day before to ask her if she could babysit for him, remember? And she said she couldn't because she was babysitting for the Romacks. So Robert Mueller called Ed Romack the next morning, and he said, "Hey, do you want me to come over and help you clean up the, blood and everything from the crime?" And Ed was thinking, how does he know about this? You know, it was late the night before when this all went down, and nobody knew other than the police. So he didn't get it. Why Robert Mueller knew. And then Robert came over, and he was like, "Hey, I have some theories here. I bet it was someone she knew, because she turned on the light and she let them in. And I bet, you know what they probably said? They probably said that they came by to pick always made her very uncomfortable. But how could he have done the crime? He was out with them, right? They were out having a good old time. Well, did he slip away, perhaps? I mean, they were out for so many hours. So turns out he did tell his friends at some point that he was going to leave to go speak to his doctor. And it's a Saturday night. Because he needs to find out something about, like, the care of his child from this doctor. That really sounds like a normal thing, but anyway, the police questioned this doctor because Robert had been gone for 2 hours. They asked this doctor, "Did Robert come to you that night?" And he said no. Seems like quite a slam dunk. The police got Robert for questioning, but they brought him to an empty barn, B-A-R-N, in the middle of nowhere, and they questioned him for like 10 hours. Then he agreed to take a polygraph. So they brought him to the police station and he had a polygraph, which he passed. And they had nothing to arrest him on. Everything that we're talking about is circumstantial. So he went home. They brought the case to a judge, and the judge convened a grand jury to decide if charges would be filed, or if they would bring him to court for this, you know. Well, the two different police jurisdictions came together to give their information to this grand jury, and I guess they both presented their sides very well, which just left the grand jury somehow baffled, confused, not knowing what to make of it. And no charges were ever made in the case. He got off scot-free. And he sued the police for how they had questioned him. He didn't win, though. So, anyway, after that was all done, he picked up and moved to Tucson, Arizona. Maybe because he had a bad reputation around this town by that time, I would think. And he lived a nice long life, all the way to age 86, never serving one moment in jail for this or any other such crime. And no justice has ever been had for Janett. And it remains an unsolved case. But I guess it's one of those unsolved of such a thing where you have two police forces that are both working on one case, and not only that, they can't even agree when it seems so obvious. I just don't get it. And then not only that, but the grand jury, they couldn't see it. Maybe we're missing something. Maybe there's another piece to this puzzle. Maybe someone was paid off somewhere. I mean, I don't know. But I don't think that people were so different, like, mentally, in the 1950s, that they wouldn't see things the same way we do. Why would this grand jury sit there and have any question in their mind? Who did it? How did the other police? How is it possible to present the side that somebody broke in through that window? Like, where does that make sense? If you didn't have this prime suspect with all these suspicious, pieces to his life, then I'd say, okay, who knows? But here we have so many details that point us right to Robert Mueller. Right down to the pencil. And this is just the grand jury. They don't have to convict him. They just have to say they think there's enough evidence to have a trial. So, maybe the grand jury just felt the evidence wasn't going to take anyone anywhere, that there would always wind up being a reasonable doubt. So, maybe that's what it is. Maybe the grand jury was like, thinking clearly he did it, but there's not enough to go on other than all these circumstantial things. That must be it. So, anyway, another horribly tragic case of a nice, sweet young girl trying to make a few bucks so she can buy a dress for Easter, and this is how it turns out. Absolutely horrific. And imagine all the people in the town thinking, it's not safe to leave our kids home alone. It's not safe to hire a babysitter. It's not safe to be a babysitter because there's a crazed lunatic out here. And it happened twice in a small rural town. Anyway, that is about all there is to say. And my heart goes out to Janett and to her family and to the Romax. Even though it wasn't their family that got killed, it happened in their house. It was their babysitter. They must have felt some amount of guilt too. I would. If that happened to my babysitter, I would be thinking, wow, is this my fault for having her come babysit here? I would be thinking that, even though it wouldn't be my fault, but that would be me. This wouldn't have happened if she hadn't babysat for us that night. She would still be alive. Although that isn't necessarily true, because if he had his sights on her, then he was gonna just look